Well, good morning to all. Very happy to have you here. Maybe, Paul, you could stop sharing the first slide, and we can have a sort of a quick look at each other. I think the group is too big to really have a good introduction to all, but we will have breakout rooms later on, so we can do that. But since I'm the chair of today, I have the pleasure that I can introduce myself to you. I'm working as a professor in grassland and grazing at Erasmus University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. And Super G, that is the project that we will be talking about this morning, and it will be introduced in a moment. And Super G asked me to act this morning as an independent chairperson, and I was quite happy to say yes to that question and to that role, because I really have a passion into grasslands, and grasslands is sort of my main driver in my work. And I'm especially positive when we are talking about results that can be used in practice, and results that can be used and are of benefit for farmers and advisors, and especially for the future generation that will in the end shape our animal husbandry. And I think this is especially why the content of today's workshop is very interesting for me, and I hope as well for you. And I'm expecting that especially because today we are mainly focusing on elements for farmers, for practical elements that can be used in a workshop with farmers. But that's for later this morning. Before we go to the introduction of today, maybe a few words about the us, the group as we are sitting here. We are a mixed group from different regions, Northern Ireland, the UK, France, and the Netherlands. And we are also a mixed group with respect to stakeholder type, because we have researchers here now, we have advisors, we have representatives from industry, and from public authorities. And with this group, what we are going to do today is the following. First, a short introduction by Paul Newell-Price about the project and about what we're going to do. Then we have 4 short presentations, pitches almost, say 8 to 10 minutes. And these will provide some examples of what has been done in Super G. It will give some challenges in the different regions where we are from. So Northern Ireland, UK, France, and the Netherlands. And then we will have a very short break just to pick up a cup of coffee or something. And then we will continue with an introduction of René Schils about permanent grasslands in general. And then we will finish with breakout rooms, and we are really looking forward to your feedback and to your ideas. And then we will come back with a wrap up at the end. So that's the overview of the total program. And I think it's now time that the project is also introduced, and that's being done by Paul Newell-Price. He is a soil scientist at ADAS and he is the scientific coordinator of the Super G project. So he's the final boss of today, I think. Mm-hmm. And he has been working on soil nutrient and manure management and agriculture, including grassland and rangelands, for 30 years. So he also brings a lot of expertise in there. Paul, I would like to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Agnes, and good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining this webinar stroke workshop. So I'll just check my slides are advancing. They don't appear to be. Right, there we go. Right, okay. So yeah, what we'll do this morning, I'll give you a short introduction to the project as a whole. Just give you an outline of what the main objectives are today, and give you a bit of an outline on the sort of main challenges on sort of permanent grasslands for farmers. So I'll just start with an overview of the project, so I hope you can see that. So as many of you will be aware, Super G is a Horizon 2020 project running from 2018 to 2024. So we have a sort of a year and a bit to go on the project. And the real focus of the project is on permanent grassland. So we're really looking at any agricultural land that's got grass or herbaceous cover that hasn't been part of an arable rotation for 5 years or more. So as the sort of fairly wordy aim says there at the top, we're looking to sort of better understand how to manage permanent grasslands optimally, so optimizing productivity, but also supporting biodiversity on permanent grassland and delivering for other ecosystem services and public goods. So in terms of the structure or the methodology of the project as a whole, we have 22 project partners over 14 countries. So we spread from Portugal up to Sweden and from Montenegro up to the United Kingdom. So thereby covering 5 biogeographic regions. So that's the Atlantic, the continental Pannonian, the Alpine, the Mediterranean, and the Boreal. And within the project, we have 23 farm networks across those countries and 17 experimental platforms. So quite a lot of field experimental trials work, demonstration work. And they were also doing a fair bit of evidence reviews, systematic reviews, expert elicitation, and modeling to sort of better understand how permanent grasslands function and how they deliver for the different public goods and for the farming business. So in summary, at the bottom, we've got sort of the expected outcomes and impact. The first one I've explained. The second one is really to sort of increase the availability and the uptake of permanent grassland management options and technologies within the 23 farm networks and beyond, and so thereby improve the competitiveness of farming systems based on permanent grassland. And then finally, we're looking at policy options, so developing agricultural policies that support the optimal management of permanent grassland. That's for the farming business and for the delivery of the environmental ecosystem services as well. So that just gives us an overview of the project as a whole. As I say, we're coming into the final year of the project, and through the course of this final year, we will be delivering a series of practical face-to-face workshops across the Atlantic region, across all the biogeographic regions. And the main purpose of this webinar is to, first of all, give you an overview of the project, but then also really discuss what the key elements are that should be part of those practical face-to-face workshops with farmers. So just to give you a sort of flavour of the workshops we've had so far, I've just got a quick summary here of some of the responses we had from farmers at our first co-innovation farm workshops back in 2019. So these are the sorts of things that they focused on in terms of the challenges of managing permanent grassland. There are challenges in terms of the very nature of permanent grass, in terms of it can be stony, it can be wet, we can be using shallow soils, sloping land can limit production and determine why it's permanent grass in the first place. And then this question of sward composition. Assessing the sward composition, deciding when to reseed or overseed, or if to do it at all, and what sort of seed mixes to use in different fields on different farms. Another thing that came out quite strongly was adapting to more extreme weather patterns that we're seeing, and in the Atlantic region, that's generally warmer, wetter winters, hotter, dry summers, as well as the extreme events. There's quite a lot of discussion around improving grazing strategies, how to graze the land more efficiently. And then on permanent grassland, but also when we're looking to overseed or reseed, the challenges of weed control. Farmers also wanted to get a better understanding of costs and benefits associated with different management interventions. So if they're trying a different option or technology, what's the cost of it? What's the benefit from that intervention for the farming business? They're looking to improve utilization and nutritional quality of grass. Another issue for many farmers, tenant farmers, is the length of tenancies. So having that guarantee or insurance into the future that it can manage the land in the way that they want to, having those guarantees. They also felt with current policies, recent policies, that there was a lack of incentive to retain permanent grassland. And we know from the work we've done that that's very important that it is retained because of all the ecosystem services that it can deliver. And then finally, they wanted to understand this conflict between productivity and ecosystem services such as biodiversity. So that just gives you a sort of quick overview of some of the responses we had early on in the project and the sorts of issues that we were trying to address with farmers in the farmer networks. So with that, I'll hand back to Agnes.
Thank you, Paul. This provides a good and clear overview, I think. Very good to start with an overview like this morning. But of course, we are very much interested to go a bit more into depth. So I suggest that we immediately continue with a couple of short presentations that will provide a little bit more insight into the challenges in permanent grasslands. And we will first start with Normandy. And I would like to introduce Joris May. He's an apprentice at the Chamber of Agriculture of Normandy in France. And yes, hi Joris, good to see you. And his missions are to produce references on forages and dairy cattle issues, especially in grasslands and production costs of dairy cattle farm. And happy to have you here, Joris. You may, well, the floor is yours, so you can share your screen. And you also have to unmute yourself. Yeah, we can see it. If you can make it full screen, that would be great. Perfect. Now you have to unmute yourself. That's the only thing left. It should be a button somewhere in the left low corner. Yeah.
Thanks.
And now the screen is not full anymore. Maybe you can make it full. Yes, perfect.
Sorry, thank you.
Yours.
So I'm going to present you the work we make in the Normandy Chamber of Agriculture. So our work was the Grass Growth Observatory in Normandy. So the objective of this work was to evaluate the growth of Normandy grasslands and give a weekly advice on grass management to farmers. And the second objective was to study the impact of climate change on the growth of Normandy grassland. So for this work, we follow 30 farms in Normandy, including 8 organic farms. So in this 30 farms, there are 4 beef farms, 1 sheep farm, and 25 dairy farms. And it represents about 550 grasslands and about 760 hectares in Normandy for grasslands. And we work with some partners that are some milk control companies, agricultural high schools, and some experimental farms, and some breeders. So what were our tasks in this work? The main task was to measure the grass once a week to have the weekly growth. And this measure was taken between mid-March and late October, with a summer break in July and August for a lot of farms because of the very low growth of the summer. And we also collect the grass surface, the cattle size, and the amount of grass in duration to have the grass availability and the day in advance in each farm to give our weekly advice. And now, what are the results of this work? The first thing is that the climate change impacts grassland yield in Normandy. So there is a reduction of yield in spring and in summer, as we can see in green and in orange on the graph. But in autumn, the yield is quite the same over the year, as we can see in red. So on this second graph, we can see quite the same results with the summer that is drier and drier, and where the growth is lower and lower over the year. And we can see, especially in 2022, that at the beginning of the growth and so the first growth and the late growth, the last growth, sorry, are higher than for other years. So we suppose that there is a shift in seasons. So the growth starts earlier in the year with a mild weather in spring, and it stops also earlier in summer because of the dry weather. And in autumn, the growth restarts later with the dry weather, but it continue later in the autumn with the later arrival of the winter cold. So we are supposing that the 10 to 20% of yield not observed in the observatory is maybe growing before we start to measure, so between weeks 1 and 11, and after we stop to measure between weeks 43 and 52. So that's why the next steps of the project will be to extend the measurement period, so to start earlier, so maybe in mid-February, to remove the summer break to see exactly what happened during the summer, and to end later, so maybe at the end of November, depending of the weather of each year. So that's all for me. Thank you for your listening. Do you have any question?
Thank you for presenting. Is there a question? You can you can raise your hand. Probably that's the best to do with using the option in Zoom. And if it doesn't work, just ask. I will start with a question then. I think this is very interesting to see those different years, and and also that probably during the winter period there's grass growth as well. But do you think you can really address this to climate change? Because yes, you have an impressive 5 period of time, but it's still only five years. What do you think?
Our first year of measure was 2005, so we have about
2005. Okay, oh,
yeah, so we have almost 20 years of measure.
I was looking at your graph 2017, 2022.
Yeah, I can maybe share it again. Our first measure was between 2005 and 2015.
I read this too quickly. Yeah.
So yeah, we can see for each color that with each 5 years more, it is especially on this graph, it is lower and lower. Yeah.
Yeah, clear. But still, it's still a limited period. But it's far better than I thought. I was probably paying too much attention to keeping the time, and did have a too quick look here. But the others paid more attention. So are there more questions? Yes, Mark Palmer, please.
Yes. Did you look at species composition in the sward, in the changing to the sward? A lot of experience I'm seeing is that with people changing sward composition from away from ryegrasses, that the summer drop is not quite as significant as it could be. And the ryegrass type growth.
Yeah, no, we haven't looked at the composition of the grassland. Maybe it can be a thing we can do next year, especially if we continue to measure during the summer to see which grasslands are growing in summer and which ones are growing in spring and in autumn.
Okay.
So we can be another thing we can add to for the next year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, then we will continue with the next one. I think there are no more questions. I don't see them. And the next one is Paul again. Paul is going to present about some challenges and outcomes in the UK. The floor is yours, Paul.
Thanks, and yes, my computer was just struggling to unmute, but I think it's managed it. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. So yeah, I'm going to do a very quick sort of whistle-top tour through five of the trial stroke experiments that were carried out in England, so covering 4 main themes. So done quite a lot of work on multi-species swards. We have an experiment looking at nutrient and manure management and the effect on soil carbon. We have one looking at managing soil health, but particularly mechanical loosening, how that compares to the use of multi-species swards. And then finally, one on an organic farm looking at different organic amendments and what they do for grass yield and quality. So yeah, I'll just summarize each one quite quickly. So first of all, with the multi-species swards, we had about 5 trials and a sort of demonstration type setup on multi-species swards across England, Northeast England and Southwest England. This is just an example of one of the ones we've done in Northumberland, where we were actually grazing mobs of ewes and lambs on different swards. So we had 5 different sward types. We were comparing grass clover with other mixes that contained legumes and herbs, particularly bird's foot trefoil and sainfoin, to see what effect they had. And the main finding really was that the grass herb legume mixes, particularly those that had the sainfoin or the bird's foot trefoil in decent quantities, had a good effect on livestock performance. So there were certainly good indications that we were getting higher daily live weight gain from the lambs, and certainly some evidence from farmers locally that they get reduced intestinal torsions where you have that herb content in the sward. So yeah, certainly some good indications that we're getting a reduced emission intensity from the lamb production. But in terms of public goods delivered, we also need to sort of bear in mind that there may be a trade-off with carbon lost at reseed. So just keeping in mind how often the reseeds are done and maybe how they're done as well. We also looked at managing these swards with and without nitrogen fertilizer, and found that before the first grazing, the nitrogen fertilizer did increase sward protein content on occasions. That can influence and improve livestock performance, could have an effect on that, but we also need to bear in mind the nitrous oxide emissions associated with that nitrogen fertilizer use. So things to consider there. Also on the pollinator plots, also on the multi-species swards at Newcastle University at Cockle Park Farm, we had a multi-species sward trial where we were looking specifically at the effect of multi-species swards on grass yield and quality, but also pollinators and invertebrates. So we had 3 species mixes to compare with the grass clover sward, and across all these mixes we also had a cut once treatment and a cut twice treatment. And the overall findings were that compared to grassland sown with ryegrass and clover, so a basic grass clover sward, the permanent grass sown with a range of forbs had greater variation in plant community composition, increased number of floral units on those plots, and increased invertebrate abundance and species richness. But there were variable effects on yield. And then when we looked at the 1-cut system as compared to the 2-cut system, The grassland under a one-cut system, compared to grassland under a one-cut system, the permanent grass under a two-cut system had increased invertebrate abundance and species richness, but again, there were variable effects on yield by year and by sward mix. So there seemed to be a trade-off between invertebrate and yield depending on the form, species, mixed composition, and the climatic variables from year to year. So there's some interesting findings there. Also at Newcastle University Cockle Park Farm, Newcastle have these Palace Leas plots, which are ancient meadows. These are long-term field experiments that have been running since 1896. And here you could look at the effect of different fertilizer and manure treatments on soil carbon. So we had these 5 treatments. The first one on plot number 2 with FYM farmyard manure applied every year. The second treatment, plot number 3, was worked on a 4-year cycle. So FYM applied in years 1 and 3, and then NPK fertilizer applied in years 2 and 4. So FYM and fertilizer applied at a lower rate, so lower compared to plot number 2. Plot 6 was the control, no fertilizer or manure applied. Plot 7 was a nitrogen fertilizer treatment, and plot 14 was a sort of higher rate of NPK fertilizer every year. And we found that as a result of these treatments being applied for around about 120 years, we were able to pick up a small difference in soil organic carbon in the top 0 to 7.5 centimeters between the FYM every year treatment, the NPK fertilizer every year treatment, and the other treatments. But it just shows that these quite large differences in manure and fertilizer application had to be operated over 120 years in order to see a difference in that top layer. But interestingly, there was no difference in soil organic carbon stocks if we took the whole profile into account. So it just shows how difficult it is to manipulate soil organic carbon within permanent grasslands. Just quickly then on to another experiment at Newcastle University at Cockle Park Farm again. This was on large plots this time, comparing a grass clover control with a multi-species sward treatment, and then the grass clover treatment with mechanical loosening. So here we're looking at the effect of those treatments on water infiltration rates, so on soil drainage. This is on a fairly compacted soil, but also those treatments on grass yield. And bottom right, you can see that the loosening treatment, in terms of the effect on water infiltration rates, there was a dramatic increase a tenfold increase in water infiltration rates from the mechanical loosening, but no real effect from the multi-species sward treatment. In terms of grass yield, we could see that in the first year, when a bit of nitrogen fertilizer was applied, about 50 kilograms per hectare, no difference between treatments. But in the second year, we did see a difference. In the second year, we didn't apply any nitrogen, and we're seeing a small yield increase from the multi-species swards that can contain the legumes and the deep rooting herbs. Okay, finally then, this is another trial which we looked at on rig and furrow permanent grassland. So this ancient long-term permanent grassland on an organic farm. And we wanted to compare the different organic amendments that are available to this organic farmer. So poultry manure, farmyard manure, cattle farmyard manure, and then this soft ground phosphate. So there's a replicated plot experiment. And we could see quite clearly from year to year that the poultry manure applied at 12.5 tons per hectare improved grass quality and yield, so year to year, for a number of different cuts. The FYM applied at 40 tons per hectare improved total dry matter yield in 2020 and 2021 by a small amount. And then when we looked at the quality, the poultry manure also had an effect on crude protein levels within the grass, not at every cut, but at quite a few of the cuts. The soft ground phosphate rock, unfortunately, when it was applied at 300 kilograms per hectare standard rate, had no effect on grass yield or quality. So the farm will be relying on the organic manures rather than the rock phosphate. And I think that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Provides a good and clear overview of a number of issues. And I think there's also room left for a few questions. Does anybody have a question? James, and thereafter Gillian.
Hi, Paul. I just wondered, your first slide with the multi-species, have you seen any issues with selection or palatability with the multi-species, or has that been commented on when we have stop grazing multi-species swards, and the cattle seem very selective on what they'll eat first and what they'll eat last, and also at different times of the year that will change. Certainly coming into the winter, plantain is the last thing that they will touch. And I just wondered if anything had been seen on the 5 multi-species plots with regards to that.
Yeah, and as you say, it's more sort of observations rather than measurements that have been made. But yeah, certainly we've seen a little bit of selective grazing, and on that demonstration where we were grazing, was pretty much set stocking the different plots with mobs of ewes and lambs. We did have a bit of selective grazing, and certainly they were taking out the herbs quite effectively over the sort of couple of years that we had those plots running. And it just shows from experience, other experience has shown that it's best to manage those swards rotationally, to allow the herbs to recover after each grazing. When they're sort of set stock for a quite long time, then the stock do tend to remove the herbs quite effectively, and we could see that either side of the fence. On one side where we had the mobs in for longer periods to monitor the live weight gain, the plantain was grazed out quite quickly. On the other side of the fence where it was grazed rotationally or cut, the plantain persisted and the herbs persisted for longer. So
Thank you. Paul, maybe you can stop sharing your screen. And I promised the final question to Gillian, but I think the hand is removed. Is there still a question from Gillian?
Yeah, sorry, I just took my hand down.
No problem.
Yeah, Paul, just a quick question. The organic phosphate application, do you know what was the base level of phosphate in the soil before you put the phosphate on?
yeah, good question. It was a low P soil, so
Right, okay,
with P index 0.
So you might have expected a response, but you didn't get one.
Yeah, we'd hoped we might get a response, but it was a slightly acidic soil, not particularly acidic, but slightly acidic, so pH 6 or a little bit below. So it's the sort of circumstances where you might hope to see a response.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry, Emily, but we have to move on. Probably you can ask the question later on during the breakout rooms or afterwards. Sorry. We will move on with Francis, and he's going to talk about the challenges in Northern Ireland. And Francis Lively, he's a principal scientific officer at AFBI in Northern Ireland, heading up the beef and sheep research program. And Francis, the floor is yours, and we see a very small presentation at the moment.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you very good, but we don't see the presentation yet.
Okay.
Now something is happening. There it is. And if you could make it a full screen, it would be perfect.
Let's hope yes now.
Yeah, that's
Perfect.
fine.
So thank you, Agnes, for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. So this morning I'm going to give a small overview of just one project that we've been looking at in Northern Ireland, and really around the challenge. Rotational grazing, we all know that the benefits of rotational grazing, but particularly from our farmer workshops in Northern Ireland, we identified that rotational grazing, particularly on beef and sheep, and in some cases, particularly on even with dairy young stock, it is unless there's a good infrastructure in place and labour around, it can be slightly challenging to actually adopt, to actually get the benefits from it. So one technology we've been looking at in Northern Ireland, both from the research side and the demonstration side, has been virtual fence technology with myself and Conor Houlihan. So I want to this morning just take a few minutes and go through just how it works and what we've found to date. So in terms of the virtual fence, it removes the need for some of the infrastructure and reduces the amount of labour. So in terms of it all works through a satellite-based system. The animals have a collar and it's all linked up through the satellite to a mobile phone app. And then once the animals are trained, so the animals get the collar, you set up on the mobile phone app a virtual boundary. And as the animals approach that virtual boundary, there's some audio cues on the collar. And those audio cues give a warning to the animal. And then as the animals go beyond that audio cue, beyond the virtual fence boundary, they get electrical pulse. So uncertainty. In terms of how it works, the animals are trained to the system, and it typically takes 3 to 5 days to get them trained up on the system. Once they are trained, it's quite simple then on your mobile phone to create the pasture, and you create the boundary. You then move. So you then set the pasture and the animals you want to assign to that pasture, again on your mobile phone app, and then you physically move the animals. So in terms of a labour perspective, very easy to manage. So in terms of the uses for virtual fencing, it can be used both in intensive and extensive production systems. So a lot of our research in AFBI has been under intensive grassland management in lowland environments, where we've been using technology to move animals onto fresh pasture, hold them in a certain area, and then offer them fresh pasture. But we've also had some demonstration work on the Caffrey Hill farm, where we've been able to actually use them in an extensive environment to either keep them away from protected habitats, or to actually graze down grass to a desirable level in an extensive grazing platform. So in terms of the potential benefits, I suppose there's 3 main benefits that are retrieved from the virtual fencing. There's the benefit to the farmer, the benefit to the environment, and the benefit to the livestock. So in terms of the farmer, it's the improved management and monitoring in a more labour efficient manner. In terms of livestock, there's the safety and welfare of the livestock, and this is particularly important in extensive environments where animals could get into water courses. Obviously, that could be environmental side as well, but thinking of particularly the likes of sheep that could get in or get stuck in a water course particularly in islands such as Northern Ireland, there's quite a lot of cliffs, and you certainly animals can be kept back from cliffs so they can't fall over. So there is a health and safety aspect there as well. And then, say from an environmental perspective, you can potentially keep animals away from water courses, or indeed you can keep them away from protected habitats in extensive grazing systems. But obviously, with all technology, there can be challenges, and that's what our research has been focusing on. So a lot of our research has been focusing on the animal welfare. So although they can protect the animals, what is the implication of wearing the collar and getting potentially these audio cues and some electrical pulses on animal welfare? The technology, how reliable is it? What's the lifespan of the technology? How does it work? Another challenge, I suppose, going forward is the current cost. So they currently cost around 300 £300 for a cattle collar, plus about a £30 annual subscription. I suppose that works into about €340 plus an annual subscription of €30 to €40 per collar, depending on the number of collars. And then I suppose the other challenge is just mobile. It all works obviously of GPS and of a mobile network, and it's just coverage, and will the coverage actually work? So that's some of the work that we've been working through. So in terms of our program at API, we've been looking at the functionality aspect, the animal aspect, and the capability of the work. So in terms of the collars, do they work? How reliable are they? In terms of the animal, the welfare, the learning, how do the animals learn? How do they relearn? Is there any welfare or behavioural aspects? And also, what's the productivity? Does wearing the collar have any impact on productivity? And then we want to identify if there's any uses or limitations to the collars, particularly in areas where you may have trees, or areas that may be quite extensive, such as the hill farm at Caffrey. So to date, we've undertaken 7 detailed studies looking at animal welfare over the past 2 grazing seasons, with just under 300 animals involved. So this has involved both sheep, cattle, both dairy origin cattle, suckler origin cattle, suckler cows and their calves, and also dairy cows. And I suppose some of the key findings, we can't go through them all today, but some of the key findings is just how the animals learn. And certainly we have found that animals do learn the equipment, learn how to use the equipment quite fast. And there's both experimental and social learning side to it. In terms of the containment, does it work or does it not work? We have certainly had very successful usage, both in our studies at Hillsborough, where we've been trying to graze animals in an intensive system, restrict them to a small area, and then move them to a fresh pasture. And we've got very good, it's worked extremely well there. And it's also, we've demonstrated on the hill farm that it can work as well, up on a large, where the animals can have access to a large area, but you want to restrict them to a confined area to graze down the vegetation to a desirable level over the winter. It does work there as well. From an animal welfare perspective, we have a lot of behavioural cameras still to look at, but we've taken a lot of cortisol measurements to identify the stress level in the animal, and really we've compared this to animals exposed to electric fence, and to date the very comparable results to either virtual fence or electric fence. That said, we have noticed individual animal variation in the learning and behavioural aspect, and some animals will push the system, some animals will get push the system to get a lot of audio cues, and actually, you know, almost push the limit to get the electric shock, where other animals will very rarely get an audio cue, or if they do, they'll turn right around and walk away. But certainly positive results to date, and say the studies are ongoing at present, and more results will follow in due course. So thank you. That's a very quick overview.
Thank you so much. I see questions coming up, and but time is up for this moment, so we have to save those questions for the breakout rooms later on. I'm sorry there. Maybe Jouke can already set up his presentation. And in the meantime, I have a number of questions as well, which I would like to ask. I'm not going to ask them, but it was striking to me when I'm quite active in the, Jouke, you are going to set up your presentation, yes? Yeah. It was striking to me that we have a grazing working group of the European Grassland Federation, and there we discussed virtual fencing and in relation to animal welfare. And there were several countries and regions in Europe where virtual fencing and even research into virtual fencing is prohibited due to that reason. It's good to address that up here. And in the meantime, we see the presentation of Jouke, because Jouke is the next one who's going to present some challenges from the Netherlands. And Jouke Oenema is a scientist at Wageningen Plant Research in the Netherlands. And he's working on dairy farming systems and nutrient cycling. And Jouke, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Agnes. Well, let's continue with this. Yes. Okay, in workshops with farmers, we discussed several themes. And today I will highlight the 2 themes which were part of research in projects about grassland and dairy farming systems. The first one is about carbon sequestrations on dairy farms. This is important because of our mitigation targets in the Netherlands, and also the upcoming carbon crediting. And the second one is about species-rich grassland on peat soil, also because important about biodiversity issues, for example, flowers and pollination, but also bird protection. Let's start with carbon sequestrations. We asked farmers what they think, which measures are achievable in relation to store carbon in the soil. So 16 farmers were involved in these workshops, and we asked their opinion. And here in this graph, you see the results of these workshops. I don't want to go in detail with all the measures, but by far most important measure was the use or more use of manure and compost, followed by optimizing crop management and the use of multi-species swards in grassland. Surprisingly is that they don't, for example, for the Dutch circumstances, is that the increase of proportion of grassland, it's only minor, because the proportion of grassland on dairy farms in the Netherlands is already very high.
Yeah, okay, this is number of participants, not percentage.
Now this is, sorry, yeah, that's right. This is the number of participants. So for us, it's almost all, we had 16 at the max, so 15 up to 16 named the manure and compost as the important measure to what is achievable. Next one is another part of the research, was a simulation study of soil carbon with the model ROTC. And for this study, we use data of actual and monitored data from pilot commercial farms in project Scouts and Opportunities. Well, this projects with pilot commercial farms exist already for more than 20 years. So we have data for a feasible period. So for some fields, we have data for a period over 20 years. And here on the right side, you see a graph of the situations of the farms in the Netherlands, and these we used only farms on mineral soils. So peat soils, data from peat soils were excluded for this study. So in this, and based on the monitored data of crop and manure management from feeds, the annual change in soil carbon was simulated. 2 different systems were distinguished. We have the permanent grassland, is the blue square, and we have a grass arable crop rotations. And the arable crops were mostly forest maize. I think for more than 90% is forest maize is in a crop rotation, but also some fields with potatoes or bulb flowers, or sugar beets were also included in this rotations. On the x-axis, you see the farms 1 to 9, and the figure inside the markers indicates the number of fields. And what you can see is that the store of carbon in permanent grassland, of course, we know that is higher than in a grass arable rotations. But what you see also, and that is maybe also surprisingly, is that there is a huge difference among farms, as well as in permanent grassland, but also in a crop arable rotations. And of course, the crop arable rotation depends also of the length of the grass period and arable period. But for permanent grassland, it was also a huge difference. And the most important reason for this difference are the difference in initial carbon stock at the beginning, because low carbon changes are related with high initial stock. So if you have already a high level of carbon in your soil, it's very difficult to have a high change of annual change of carbon. And now I will continue with the other theme. It was the species with grassland. Same as with the carbon sequestration, we ask farmers about their opinion of species with grassland. This was also done in a workshop with a group of farmers, and these farmers were located on peat soil. And we asked about their opportunities and threats. For opportunities, they highlighted the societal demands, but also healthy aspects for animals as an opportunity. But they noticed that current practice is not connected with ecosystem services, so they see that as a challenge. And these farmers, there has a high willingness of learning and improving management of species with grassland. There were also threats and barriers, like at this moment is an unclear definition of biodiversity among schemes in relation to the species with grassland. There were also concerns, Paul mentioned already in one of the introduction slides, about a risk and uncertainty of financial security and a payment scheme, also for a short term, but also for a longer term. And also the yield reduction is named as part of concern, and this is also, of course, in relations with payments and income and costs. The last one is about we investigated the current management of fields with different levels of species with grassland. Was investigated and compared with the management of intensively managed grassland fields. So in this graph, you can see the yield of intermediate field species rich grassland and also with a high species richness grassland. And what you can, and the yield of the intensive management is indicated here with the blue line. So what you can see in this graph, there is huge variations among fields with a kind of species richness, vary from 2,500 to almost 12,000 kilogram of dry matter per hectare. And there is also a huge gap between, well, conventional management grassland and also the species rich grasslands. So besides the huge gap in yield, biomass yield, there is also a huge gap in the quality of the grass and the quality of the energy content, but also the crude content. These were sometimes 50% lower than those in the intensively management fields. So this was in a nutshell my story about our experiments and trials and workshops in the Netherlands. Thank you.
Thank you, Jouke. There would be room for one question.
Okay.
And if not, then I presume then we continue, because then we have more time for the discussion later on in the breakout rooms, which is very good. And what we anticipated at this moment was that, well, you have had already quite a lot of presentations. So a cup of coffee would be nice. So the idea is that we have a 5-minute break just to take a cup of coffee. And that would mean that we would start again at 11:01, 1 minute past 11. So please take your break, have a cup of coffee, and we will meet back again 11:01.
Typical Dutch punctuality.
Sorry about that. Well, I hope you all found your way back. I got my cup of coffee. I hope you got yours as well. And because we have some more work to do, and later on this morning we will talk to each other in the breakout rooms, and I'm really looking forward to that part, because then we have a real exchange, and we already have heard quite a lot of interesting challenges, things that have been done within the Super G, and of course it's only a highlight because there's many more. But before we go to the breakout rooms, we have one final presentation, and that is a presentation from René Schils, and he will talk about permanent grasslands, unlocking their potential for delivery of multiple ecosystem services. You already see it in the screen, and I think this is a very good start of what we are going to discuss later on in the breakout rooms. And René Schils is working at Wageningen Plant Research in the Netherlands as well. He is leading the work package on ecosystem services delivery from permanent grasslands. And what I think is quite interesting is that he mentioned that he is interested in the role of those permanent grasslands in the upcoming food transition in Europe. And in the meantime, I started talking at 11:01. It's 11:02, so I guess everybody is here now to hear your presentation, René. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Agnes. So, like the title says, I'll talk about provision of permanent grasslands and provision of ecosystem services in permanent grasslands. Sorry. And my talk consists of 2 sections. First, I will address, let's say, the permanent grasslands in Europe in general. Where do we find it? On which kind of farm types do we see permanent grasslands? And what are the grassland types on these permanent grasslands? And then in the second section, I will dive deeper into the provision of ecosystem services, and also will try to make this link between provision of ecosystem services and farm types and grassland types. So first, let's have a look at the area of permanent grassland in Europe. Well, perhaps you've seen this map before, but it shows you the distribution, or actually the share of permanent grassland within a certain region. And overall, we've got approximately 1/3 of the agricultural area in Europe is in permanent grassland. But you can see there's quite a large difference. So you have areas where, like Denmark, for instance, where you have less than 20% of permanent grasslands, but you also have areas with up to, well, more than 80%, like in the British Isles, but also in the Alpine regions. And then there's a lot of diversity within Europe in the proportion of permanent grasslands. But what we are really interested in is to see, if you have a look at this, can we specify this and say, well, which kind of farm types do we find this permanent grasslands, and what are the types of different grasslands? So therefore, we've developed 2 typologies, one on farming systems and one on grassland types. So I'll start with the farming systems typologies that was developed by our Italian colleagues in Torino. And it's mainly based on FADN data. And it's got 5 different factors, or 5 different levels that determine the farming type. So the first one is, of course, the livestock species and the subcategories. Then it's the stocking density or the stocking rate. And it's the third one is the proportion of permanent grasslands on a farm. And then there's 2 other ones, which is the cutting and the grazing management of the grassland, and also the contribution of the permanent grassland to the overall forage supply of livestock. So that's also an important one. But we are able, so I said we use these FADN data, and we were able to well, have spatial allocation of the first 3 levels, but especially the 4th and the 5th level is, well, we at the moment we lack the spatial data to fill in the maps exactly. So we're still working on that and see how we can use expert knowledge, your knowledge perhaps, to also to allocate this these lower 2 categories to the map. So if just let's have a general look at Europe as a whole. So here are on the left you see the 3, the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd level, and I'm not going to discuss all these figures, but you can see, for instance, that specialized beef and specialized dairy cattle make up approximately, well, nearly 50% of the farm types with permanent grassland in Europe. And you can also see that overall in Europe, the stocking density on permanent grasslands is on 40% of the farms is lower than half a livestock unit per hectare. If we then just make a quick comparison with the Atlantic region, so then if you have a, let's say, a first glance at all these data, they are, well, more or less similar. And I think there are perhaps, well, 2 things that stand out, which are different in the Atlantic region than in the average of Europe. And that there is, well, less specialized sheep and goat farms in the Atlantic region if you compare it to Europe. And the second point, of course, is that if you look at the livestock density, the stocking density, that is considerably higher in the Atlantic region than in the whole of Europe, or Europe as a whole. Well, you can use these maps also to zoom in to the different livestock categories, and I think most of us here in this meeting might be interested in beef and dairy farming. So just have a look on where are the specialized beef farms. So they're mostly located in United Kingdom and Ireland. And you can see that the specialized dairy farms are much more, well, let's say, dispersed among different regions in Europe, like in Denmark, Netherlands, Brittany, north of Spain, and Ireland, Southern Ireland. And if you look at some of the characteristics of these farms, and again, I have to stress I'm talking about not grassland in general, but really let's say the farms with permanent grassland. You can see, first of all, that let's say the stocking density of most beef farms is in the region between 0.5 and 1 livestock unit per hectare. And if you look at the right hand of the screen for the dairy farms, you see that most farms are, like we saw earlier, in the Atlantic region, are much more intensively managed. So they are above 2 livestock units per hectare. And if you look at the proportion of permanent grassland on beef, specialized beef farms, the highest category is in the 50 to 70% proportion of permanent grassland, whereas on the dairy farms, the 70 to 100% proportion is the highest represented in the dairy farms. And that, well, it depends a bit on from what region you are. So at least for me, it was sometimes a bit, well, counterintuitive that this difference between beef and dairy farms on the proportion of permanent grassland. But I'm happy to hear your opinion on this. Then moving on to the grassland typology. Here again, we have several factors that determine the typology, and I have to stress here that this typology that we've developed, and it was developed by mainly by Bettina Toon who's currently working at Fibel in Switzerland. And this is really looking at, let's say, different levels of management and how that determines your grassland typology. And again, you have several factors: the presence of management, presence of woody plants, renewal interval, and again, like with the farming systems, you also have intensity here. And then we have potential productivity, and again, cutting and grazing management. And I'll try to walk walk you through these categories in the next slide, because overall there are 18 different grassland types. I just too quickly here. So first of all, we have the so PG stands for permanent grassland. First, we have of course the unmanaged grasslands, and then the managed grasslands. And within the managed grasslands, you have the grasslands which have more than 10% woody plants and shrubs, and you have the grasslands that have less than 10%. And within this woody plants, within this unmanaged, we also have different branches, but I'm only going to work out this branch for this presentations, just for clarity. And those are, because those are mostly found on, let's say, the dairy and the bee farms in the Atlantic regions. So for the woody plants, or for the permanent grasslands without woody plants, we first have a distinction between what we call the real permanent grasslands, which are infrequently renewed, so which the renewal interval is higher than 15 years. And we have what we call the semi-permanent grasslands, which have a higher renewal frequency, or an interval lower than 15 years. Then within the category, so of the real permanent grasslands, we distinguish high intensity, intermediate intensity, and low intensity grasslands. And this intensity, these thresholds, they are based on nitrogen input. So for instance, high intensity is more than 180 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. Low intensity is lower than 80 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, but also on defoliation frequency, so cutting frequency. Are they cut more or less than two times a year, or more or less than 3 or 4 times a year, and also on the number of grazing days per hectare. And we are not there yet. Then we've got the potential production within the intermediate and in the low intensity types. So you might be either in a region which has a high potential production, or you might be in a region which has a marginal or a lower potential productions due to climate limitations or soil limitations, perhaps. And then finally, okay, too quick. Finally, then each type also has a subcategory which is dominantly cutting or dominantly grazing. So all in all, then you have these 18 different grassland types. And what we are working at now is to put this all into a PG typology atlas. And as you can see, this is work that is still in progress. And each permanent grassland type, which is a key, is a legend in the key in the legend of the atlas, is being described by what we call a PG portrait. And in this portrait, we'll give some general description of the PG type. Where can you find it? How is it managed? What are the most important deliveries of ecosystem services? But also, what are the risks and the threats for these different PG types? And then finally, per portrait, we also have what we call a case study, which is a description of an actual real-life field of this PG type. So that can be a specific field anywhere in Europe that fulfills the criteria of this PG type. So that's so far the typologies, and now I'm moving on to the second section of my talk, and have a look at the delivery of the ecosystem services and see if we can link that to the farm types and the PG types. Well, as you all know, I think permanent grasslands, of course, well, they are very well good in delivering cheap, good quality forage for for dairy cows and beef and sheep and goats, etc. But of course, there's much more to permanent grasslands. They're beautiful to look at, good for the landscape, they're nice for recreation. They have a huge botanical diversity. They can protect against erosion. They store carbon. So these are all different ecosystem services that are delivered by permanent grasslands. And in Super G, we did a very extensive review of the literature, in which we looked at all these different ecosystem services and biodiversity, and how they were affected by either by land use or by management. And we looked at these studies and summarized how what the reported effects were for comparisons between, for instance, permanent grassland and cropland, permanent grassland and forests, for instance, but also on reported effects on nitrogen input, grassland renewal, cutting and grazing frequency, the use of multi-species swards, and legume use. And this was a very extensive review. So we started with something like 17,000 papers that we found, and then we, through a very meticulous selection procedure, we ended up with approximately 700 papers on these different topics that was suitable for our analysis. And you can see here that the larger the dot, the more papers we found in a certain region, and you can see, well, more or less some relation that in regions, of course, with high amounts or high proportions of permanent grassland, we found a lot of papers, but also we found papers on permanent grasslands where you might not expect them perhaps, and they were in other regions in Europe with lower proportions of permanent grasslands. I just go quickly back to the previous slide. So I'm not going to show you all the results, but I just selected two of the contrasts. First, the comparison between permanent grassland in comparison to cropland, and then the second one is the effect of nitrogen input. So first, the land use. So here we have the results of nearly 200 cases. And you see on the left-hand side, you see all the indicators for the different ecosystem services. So for biodiversity, we have pollinators, plant richness, for instance. For provision of animal feed, below we have the yield, the energy content, and the protein content. And then you see all these dots. And here on the left-hand side, so if it's a negative value between 0 and minus 1.0, this shows the fraction of studies with a favorable outcome for cropland. And here on the right-hand side, you see the fraction of studies with a favorable outcome for permanent grassland. So for instance, if you look here at threatened species, we found that approximately, well, let's say 60 to 70% of the studies showed a favorable outcome for permanent grasslands, so that you have it's favorable for the protection of threatened species. This was based on 11 studies, and there's these three, and it was highly significant. On the other end of the scale, for instance, on yield, you see we had 5 studies. We couldn't say whether that was a significant effect, but you can see that there's also quite a big range there. This was on the left-hand side, but in general, you can see that if you look at all the ecosystem services, that they tend to be more on the right-hand side. So most, let's say, ecosystem services are delivered by permanent, or let's say permanent grasslands are favorable for the delivery of most ecosystem services. And you can also see there's a clear trade-off between, let's say, the non-feed ecosystem services and the feed ecosystem service here, yield and energy content. Whereas protein content is favorable for permanent grassland again. Then moving on to the effect of nitrogen input. Again, you see this trade-off. So you see that here on the left-hand side, you see the studies with unfavorable effects of nitrogen. So for the biodiversity, for most of the indicators for climate regulation, nitrogen and water quality. Whereas on the right-hand side, you see, of course, I mean, it's not surprising to you, of course, you see the favorable effects of nitrogen on yield, protein, but less on energy, for instance. So I only took out 2 examples here, and we did similar analysis for defoliation frequency, for the presence of legumes, for the presence of multi-species swards, etc., for grassland renewal. And so our conclusions were from this systematic review is that first, we really need to protect the existing permanent grasslands to prevent a further decline of the delivery of these multiple ecosystem services. And also, we need, on the existing permanent grasslands, we need to reduce the current management intensity to expand the, let's say, the different ecosystem service delivery on the permanent grasslands. And like I pointed out before, and here it's summarized again, there is, of course, this very important trade-off between feed and other ecosystem services, which are summarized here as biodiversity and environmental effects. But you can see that if going from left to right, if you increase your land use and management intensity, you will harvest more feed, the higher quality. But of course, your trade-off is in the environmental quality and the delivery of or the provision of biodiversity. And we somehow have to move to a system where we reward the delivery of multiple ecosystem services, and then you can see that there's some kind of optimal value in this scale of land use and management intensity. And of course, this is only a framework where the actual, let's say, optimum is that will depend on where you are in Europe and also on the, let's say, the costs and the benefits of the different farming systems. And what I would, my last slide is to try to link these farming system typology, which I described before, and the permanent grassland typology with opportunities to increase the delivery of multiple ecosystem services. And like I say, this is a framework and it's open for discussion. So here on the top, you have the different indicators, either for the farming system typology, so proportion of permanent grassland, contribution to forage supply on a farm, and then you have the intensity and the grassland management, which is an indicator for the farming system typology, but also for the permanent grassland typology, and you have your potential productivity, and then you move from low to high, or you move from cut to grazed, etc. And then here on the left, I have set those land use options, so prevent conversion of permanent grassland to temporary grassland, or convert temporary grassland to permanent grassland. And these are management options, and they are ranked more or less with the highest impact on multifunctionality. So that's reduction of nitrogen input, reducing your grassland renewal frequency, defoliation frequency, or increase species richness or legume presence. And I just did a very quick attempt for myself to fill this in, and you can have many different views on how you can fill this in, but I think and I hope this might help to select your farm systems and your permanent grassland types where it will be the most efficient to stimulate certain land use changes or to stimulate certain management options. And well, this is, like I said, it's open for discussion, and we can fill this in the future, and maybe also have a brief talk about this in the breakout sessions. But that's up to you, of course. So thank you very much for listening, also on behalf of all the colleagues within the Super G team.
Thank you very much, René. And yes, we will move out to the breakout room soon, but there is time for some questions now on this particular presentation.
Okay.
If there are any. Maybe I can ask one, because you chose the you chose to use a renewal interval of more than 15 years. And of course, you are aware that in the European Union, it's 5 years. And I can fully understand why you chose more, because we've done in the past work on that one as well, where we said it should be at least 10 to 20 years. But I was wondering, and that was mainly due to the fact that if you want to have some effects on biodiversity, you need more years than the 5. But I was wondering, how did you get your maps then? How did you get the maps for the 15 years? Because the easily available data is from 5 years and more.
Yeah. Well, first, I have to stress that, let's say, the 5-year definition of permanent grassland in Europe, that's 5 years without an arable crop in between.
Yeah.
Whereas here in our 15 years, so we're talking about permanent grasslands already. And this 15-year is grass on grass renewal. So that's different than, so for instance, if you have grass on grass renewal, also in the European Union, then you stay in the permanent grassland category. And here, so this is really, so it's slightly different. And
the
second question, I can be quite quick actually, because we don't have those maps yet. And that's one of the things that perhaps Paul can help me on that. And Bettina is not here in this meeting. But as far as I know, we don't have good maps of, let's say, whether it's 15 years, older than 15 years or younger than 15 years. So that's also one of those points where we need expert input from each of the different countries to get good estimates of the age. Yeah.
Maybe Remco can already help, or maybe you have another question.
Yeah, for the Netherlands, perhaps here we have some info.
I just have another question, also to avoid Agnes is asking all the questions.
Good.
But you were addressing ecosystem services, and it's, from my perspective, it's good to see there's quite some overlap with the CRP objectives. But I'm still missing one, and that's landscape. So you address climate, soil, water, biodiversity, quite okay, and animal welfare. But
no, landscape was also in the, let's say, we in the recreational or in the cultural values. We had aesthetics, landscape aesthetics, and recreational value. But it was only we only found studies where we compare land use, of course, so for cropland and for comparison with forest, we could say something. But for management, there are no studies, at least we found no suitable studies that showed effect of management on landscape or on recreational value. So that's really a big knowledge gap, actually.
That's a gap indeed, yes.
Yeah. But we did so we did identify it as an ecosystem service, but we could only show the outcomes for the contrasts in land use.
Thank you. I think we are all ready for the breakout rooms, so we will move up there. And maybe while I explain what we are going to do, maybe Paul, you can put up your one slide about what we are going to discuss there now at the plenary session already, so everybody can have a look at it before. I hope it will work, because you are freezing for me. No, you're back again. So what we are going to do is the following. We are going to split up in 3 breakout rooms, and those 3 breakout rooms will be chaired by Paul, by Jouke, and by Francis. And you don't have to choose, you will automatically go into one of these groups. And in the groups, we tried to combine people from different regions and people with different backgrounds. And we are hoping for an interesting discussion. And what we are going to talk about is what are the key elements that we should include in practical face-to-face workshop with farmers. So what from all these messages we've got is interested to be shared with farmers. What do we have to share with farmers? And of course, we have some context there. And the context is in the context of farm profitability, current challenges, and the agri-environment scheme opportunities. So we will now automatically be moved into 3 groups, and we will come back to a plenary end session in exactly 30 minutes. That's the idea. So I think this.
So we are the first one we got getting back.
It appears so.
Good to be punctual, yes.
Joanna, where are the others?
They should be coming. They had 60 seconds to come back. Let's see, they are starting to join now.
Maybe I was too strict in
People are coming in, so we now have. I think we have all the groups. I presume. Well, I hope you enjoyed this last half hour. I did, and well, it was too short, and we already knew this. It's always too short, those breakout rooms. But anyway, our sincere thanks to first of all to all your contributions, and well, I was triggered with something that was said in our breakout room. That is, farmers are willing to change. But they just need to know in which direction. And we had a lot of information from Super G, and this breakout rooms and also this final discussion is all about what are the messages we can send to the farmers based from what we know from Super G. And it would be great if that would at least provide a little bit of the direction we would like to go. And this last half hour is intended to sort of report back from what was said in the breakout rooms, but also feel free to add things, or if you hear things from different groups. But let's see how it goes. And I would propose that we start with the group of Francis. And I'm not sure, Francis, whether you are going to report back or somebody from your group. But it's up to you. So the floor is yours now first.
Yeah, I'll start off, and some of the other folks can maybe lead in. So yeah, we had very good discussion. Just lots of notes. So I'm just trying to think how best to summarize it. But I think one of the key things that was mentioned was we presented a lot of really good data this morning. But one of the outputs that we still need to provide from Super G is I suppose the economic benefit of an economic analysis of all these various aspects, should it be changing the level of intensity or using virtual fences or whatever it may be, that we actually get an economical value to be able to show to the farmer, this is the cost, this is the benefit, this is how it's going to affect the profitability. And really from that that links to almost everything from if there's going to be a policy change, if there's going to be a change in an agri-environmental scheme, we need to be able to put the economics to it to demonstrate to the farmer, this is what the cost is going to be, this is what the benefit is going to be. So that's really one of the key steps. I think in a lot of the I suppose changes going forward or trying to get farmer adoption, we need to be able to encourage them. So it's almost the carrot rather than the stick approach, and certainly having that economical assessment there will be beneficial there. There's a lot of stuff coming down the road in terms of obviously intensity, the levels of nitrogen, and reducing that, and just showing the benefits and being able to demonstrate the benefits of that there, both again with the economic coming into it. I suppose the uptake of technology, and just again demonstrating to the farmer that the benefits coming there, and also methods of demonstrating to the farmer from the environmental side what will actually mean to their farm if there is a move in the environmental side of things. There was also a discussion on some of the methodologies for evaluating some of our grasses in the past, and some of this being very high levels of intensity, and how relevant it is if we move to lower levels of intensity. Is some of our varieties still going to perform well on a low input system where they've maybe been evaluated under high input systems? That's a quick overview. Rennie, do you want to, or anyone else, do you want to come in and cover some of the other stuff? I appreciate the other couple of groups have to talk as well.
Maybe a quick question, because I understand the economic perspective, because you really need an economic perspective, and economic can come from at the farm, but also more the societal level. But do you think economy is the only trigger? I mean, there's lots of research saying that the mindset of the farmer is very important. Its environment is very important. Is it only the? I fully agree that money is important, and you need to know the effect. But is it the only thing we should focus on?
It mightn't be the only thing, but I think it is a key. It's very, very important because it's really what puts the bread and butter on the table. And I think that was something that was mentioned. So yeah. It's probably the key factor. Is probably, I suppose, in terms of importance, is probably the most important factor, Agnes.
And I think that next to mindset of the farmer, it's also the mindset of the environment, because when you say it's a mixture of economy and environmental benefits, those environmental benefits are relevant for society. So then you should have kind of a model where they really appreciate those environmental added value, and that it's also in the price of the products. So
exactly.
Money again, but that it's more than that.
Yeah.
If you put it different.
No, that's what Remco is saying it himself now, but Remco mentioned it in our group as well, that's important of all these schemes. So as long as we are only, let's say, as farmers are mainly paid for delivery of milk or meat or whatever, then the change is very hard. Whereas if these schemes can supplement the income or have another type of pricing scheme, which truly, let's say, values the other ecosystem services, then that makes change a lot easier, of course.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned the case of our eco scheme, where we support multi-sward, permanent grassland, grass clover, etc.
Yeah. But it was mentioned earlier on by somebody in a presentation as well. Sometimes it's about confidence, about if you're making a big system change to your farm business and you're relying on a government scheme, which in this country has been very slow in coming forward, and people haven't got very much confidence that it's not just going to change again and the rug's going to get pulled out from under their feet. In a lot of farmers' minds, it's a lot easier to stick with a system that that works than to make that change. Mm-hmm. And there are environmental benefits, there are sociological benefits, and there are people willing to change. But ultimately, it's confidence that that new system is going to maintain that level of income.
That's nice. That then we have an agreement in all groups, because also in our group, as that was also mentioned, that
maybe
farmers to be
aware
about to improve that farmers be aware to improve management instead of only looking at subsidies. That was, and that is, I think that is a common agreement within these groups, and I think that's very interesting, because we always hear from farmers that we want to have subsidies, we want to we have the payment schemes of the insecure financial situations, etc. But on the other hand, there is also some key elements by the farmer that they be aware to change something.
And you discussed those key elements in your group. Maybe you can give a short summary of what you discussed?
Oh, that's the bridge to my summary?
Yeah, it is.
Well, yes, that was only at the end of our discussion, because we have a very lively discussion, I think, in all the groups. The time was too short. First, of course, yeah, it is also that I think we and research, but be aware to protect permanent grassland and but also ecosystem services. But in general, of course, there is a conflict between productivity and other issues in relation to permanent grassland. That is the big key, I think. The production, because of the feed supply. For, well, if you have animals on a farm, then you need feed for the animals, and that is I think the biggest conflict in. But on the other hand, I think if we want to change, if there is a transition, the transitions need also the resilience is also very important. Jason mentioned the resilience is very important, and not only societal, economic, but also technical resilience is. I think it's very important how to change. And in general, if you want to have a transition, maybe farmers have to change from a kind of maximization to a optimization. But then, what is the optimal level? And that, of course, that depends, of course, of which type of ecosystem services you also want to achieve. So that is not very clear, and that is, I think, also a very lacking. I think lacking knowledge also for farmers. Okay, if I want to change, how I want to change? I think that was also mentioned in the first group. I think they need clear solutions to kind of future. What was also interesting was someone said it is well, in general there is not a kind of lack of knowledge by farmers, but it is also in relation to permanent grassland, but a lack of interest, because interest for farmers is nowadays is inside the barn. It's not outside the field. Maybe there is also, they have to be aware that they can improve well, the management from that be if they want to use multi-species, they have to be aware that they also gain something, not only biomass yield, but you gain other issues what can be interesting for your farm. What also interesting is about the communication, and we need also a kind of communication to farmers. And we said, okay, the supply chain is a key element for the communications. But at this moment, the communication of the supply chain is mostly focused, well, the Northern Ireland and England, on carbon. Carbon is now, it's a key. And well, there is more than only carbon.
Okay.
Maybe missed I something from our group?
I'm triggered by the point you addressed, that it's not a lack of knowledge but a lack of interest, and I saw at least some people nodding, the people from DMS. But I think maybe the pasture for life people will say, yeah, but there is a lot of interest. So what is the general idea there?
I can react on that. I think a lot of years earlier, like before, we were always focusing on production, and is focusing on production of dairy and beef. This is still the main interest of farmers because they see this as their income. But actually costs like fertilizers and feed cost, or keeping a good soil, was not a lot of times on the agenda as well. On people that were going to school in the past, the mainly lessons were focusing on production and not on how to keep a healthy soil. So I think this minds need to shift, and this shift is where we are now in. So this is just the focus and the mindset that needs to change, and we need to help them with this process. And I think that is really important. And for example, we can do this with demonstration farms. There are always pioneers that are already improving in this and already working on this, and those pioneers can show others that this change of mindset is actually helping them as well.
I might jump in there, just really a comment on my discussion groups. For the last 4 or 5 years, it was very much production focused, and I had the best attendance at production-based meetings. But the best thing that happened to my groups is when nitrogen went from £200 a ton to £900 a ton, and all of a sudden everyone was interested in grassland and soils and carbon. So it might be controversial, but it was the best thing that happened to my groups.
And sorry about it, but I didn't fully understand. What was the best thing that happened to your group?
The best thing that happened to my groups was when nitrogen got so expensive that farmers got their minds turned away from fertilizer and concentrates, and actually more onto the soils and the health of soils and carbon and grass. And that's been a change. It was a hard change and it was a painful change, but it was a good change.
Yeah, now I understand. Yeah, a hard and painful change.
It's exactly the same as the energy costs for other people. I mean, that all the discussions of climate didn't bring any change, and now everyone starts to be conscious of energy use thanks to the high price.
Does anybody want to add, or shall we go to the group of Paul?
No, just to say that, yeah, I think good summary from Jouke there. But yeah, ultimately, the having a discussion about the benefits and trade-offs of the environment versus production is really important. But also, you know, the evidence that we've got from Super G is really good from that perspective, particularly the work with the multi-species swards and that sort of thing. But also the fact that, you know, how important it is to manage the soils to retain carbon rather than build carbon with permanent grassland is also very important. So, and just to emphasize the economics side of things as well. So it all hangs together very well, because ultimately it's about fertilizer use. It's about using different sward types potentially to maintain production with reduced fertilizer levels and that sort of thing. I think we've got loads of information in Super G that we can use in the workshops, basically.
And
thank you.
Because maybe it's good to make farmers aware of the fact that.
Maybe you can come a bit closer to the laptop because it's difficult to hear.
Well, I think it's good to make farmers aware of the fact that, like, as Bob always says, they know everything of their cows, and sheep farmers, of course, they know everything about their animals. But the land is way more expensive, and they use it for years and years. But their animals, they only have them for a few years, and then they're gone again, and they're way less expensive. So it's strange to realize that farmers know everything about their animals, but they use them for a shorter while. See.
Yeah. So your main point is that the grass is much longer there than the animals itself.
Yeah.
You were a bit hard to understand, but I think
it's maybe because of my bad English. But...
No, it's because you need to be closer to the laptop.
Oh.
Yeah. But if I understood it correctly, you made the point that our land is so expensive.
Yeah.
150,000, 100,000 euros per hectare, and animals and all the energy goes to the animals, and the energy of the farmers doesn't go to the land management.
Yeah, and the fact that like in 10 years all your animals are gone and you have new animals, but your land is still there, and it's still the same land.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks. We will move up to Paul now, I think.
Thanks, Agnes. Yeah, it's interesting that one about land prices. I think Sjaak Konijn at Wageningen had showed this impressive correlation between land price and milk yield production levels, which quite an eye-opener. Yeah, so in our group, we also discussed current challenges. So a key thing, maybe it's an opportunity, but it's already been mentioned how feed, energy, fertilizer prices are going up. That's creating quite a challenge for farmers, but it's also an opportunity to really look at maybe reducing inputs of feed and fertilizer and getting more from grassland. So it plays into our hands really if we're trying to think about optimizing permanent grassland use. We talked about the sort of three elements in the round really in terms of farm profitability, current challenges, agri-environment scheme opportunities. And we sort of discussed the importance of linking farm profitability and agri-environment schemes together. And if we can actually discuss within the workshops, how we can run grazing systems to hit agri-environment scheme targets, that would be really useful output for farmers. Because I think in many countries, there may be a little bit of a barrier in terms of agri-environment scheme uptake. So if we can demonstrate how the agri-environment scheme targets can be met within a productive system and hit René's sweet spot in terms of productivity and public goods delivery, that would be a really useful thing to do. And so moving on from there, we should discuss the importance of grazing management strategies and how rotational grazing can be of benefit, and how to integrate that within the farming system. We also acknowledge that there needs to be a little bit of flexibility depending on other challenges on the farm. It may be that the farm business cannot provide all the income needed for the household. So farmers can't be on the farm all the time. So there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of what the optimal system is, what the optimal rotational grazing system is on different parts of the farm. You might have some parts of the farm that are managed maybe a little bit more intensively for productivity and pasture quality. Other parts of the farm are delivering for the environment and other public goods. But yeah, we sort of did discuss a number of these things, needing to be reasonable about profitability and the grazing strategies and the scale of the farm and the opportunities that relate to that. Yeah, and again, sometimes difficult to link the grass productivity and the utilization of grass to the agri-environment schemes. So particularly in England at the moment with the loss of the basic payment scheme over the next few years, farmers will be challenged to replace that income. It's a question of how that's achieved. We had some discussion around quite a bit about multi-species swards. First of all, how we get them established, challenges of establishing them within a permanent grassland field, and then discussions around the selection of mixtures, multi-species sward mixtures, how to get them integrated onto farm. We need good information on how to manage the multi-species swards and the right species for the right field, for the right soil type. And we thought that it's really useful to get farmers' experience on that, so get farmers talking about their own experience in introducing multi-species swards on farm. And we also discussed around multi-species the challenges of persistence of the sort of desired species within the sward, and how we maximize persistence of the multi-species, so we're not having to sort of reseed every couple of years. So those were some of the main things. I don't know if anyone else from our group has anything to add. I haven't covered everything, clearly.
Or to ask a question.
Or to ask a question, yeah.
Pose a discussion topic.
May I have a question, or maybe we can discuss it? I don't know, because we didn't discuss it within our group, but mainly we can discuss now about the presentation. And we have now all the challenges for farmers, but what can, for example, the insights of the presentations of René with the typology and with the groups, with farming systems and with the permanent grassland system typologies, can that be used, for example, kind of achieving ecosystem services in relations to different farming systems and in relations to kind of payment schemes? If the, for example, the boundaries for payment schemes in relation to typologies. Do you understand my question? I see a lot of...
Yeah, I was going to ask, maybe Remco can say something about it, but he was looking a bit difficult, so I'm not so sure.
Yeah, well, actually, this question was for Remco. Because...
Can you say something about it, Remco? Or?
Am I allowed to think about it and come back later?
You are,
of course,
and you are probably also all very well aware that we are approaching the end time of our meeting, which is scheduled at 12:30. Is there anything else which you would like to address, or some really urgent questions or issues that you want to bring over to the Super G team? And I'm pretty sure, like Remco said, I have to think about it. It can also be done after this meeting. I don't see really urgent questions, and I assume, Emily, yes, you are the one.
It's just a thought, Anya, that I think, because we briefly mentioned opportunities as well in our group rather than necessarily just challenges. And I just wondered if there's a slightly missed opportunity. And I get that you're coming more towards the end of Super G. But one thing that we hadn't mentioned is actually the health benefits of produce, ruminant produce that comes from pasture-based systems as well, and I realize why there's not necessarily a market for that yet necessarily, but I just wondered if that's an opportunity that might need to be looked at slightly longer term.
Thank you. I also see some additions in the chat now, and I also see that Remco, you found the answer, baby. Can you be brief in your answer?
I found the question.
You found the question.
Yeah, because I'm also very interested how other member states or former member states support permanent grassland. So
now probably we all have to think about it.
Yes.
The other way around. I'm also a bit eager to end the meeting, because I know that usually people have other meetings after it, and they always take a bit longer. But I'm inviting you to stay if you want to. If you want to discuss a bit further. But I wrote 4 sentences to sum up what we have been discussing, and I started with farmers need to know which direction they have to go, and we said there is a conflict between productivity and the other ecosystem services, and a main issue in all the groups was the economic benefit. Then the economy might solve that conflict by providing in one way or another additional money for the farmer. And then there's the carrot approach and there's the stick approach, and usually, well, I prefer the approach of the carrot. And also, it's not only the farmer. We started this, well, what should we mention to farmers? But it's the full environment around the farmer. So we were talking about messages to farmers. And yes, we have messages and we should bring them, but we should also bring messages to the other stakeholders around the farmer. And in the end, all of them, their focus should change, their mindset should change. And coming back to the first part, where farmers need to know which direction, I think we need to show the farmers how to combine productivity with those different ecosystem services. And in the framework of Super G, there are certainly several links. And with that, I would like to thank you all for contributing to the discussion, for bringing in presentations. Also, Consula Joanna for the technical support during the meeting, which is very good. I see Jouke saying yes, yes. Thank you. And what do I miss? I don't miss anything. Thank you so much. And I would like to wish the Super G project all the best for the final part of their project. Looking forward to the final results. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Agnes, and thank
you,
Chair.
Agnes.
Thank you, Agnes, for hosting.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much.